Hello and welcome to the Grumpy Sound Guy Show. I am your host, Mr. J.R. Everhart from COP Audio and Staging right here in the Mid-Atlantic. I am the Grumpy Sound Guy himself, or so I have been told by my affectionate followers. This week, we're going to talk about not using a processor on our sound system. I had a follower ask me to talk about this today over on Facebook. In a thread that I had put up. I've had conversation about this, kind of woven in and out of some of my other videos, like The Art of Mixing. I probably mentioned it in that series back about a year ago. I've mentioned it in several videos throughout that I don't use a processor for my B and C rigs, from my B rig down. My A rig is a big 4-way EAW KF850 rig. And it does require a processor, very much so. And we'll talk about the differences between those two. So stick around. You do not want to miss a second of today's show. Hey guys, if I could just have a moment of your time to talk to you about this channel. 49.8% of you guys watching this right now is not subscribed to this channel. Will you please hit that subscription button? It doesn't cost anything to subscribe to the channel on the public side here. And then that gives us tools and resources and for my marketing team to be able to do what we need to do to get this content out to people who really enjoy this sort of thing. The other thing is, if you're super digging this and you'd like a deeper look into my world, then subscribe to the paid side of the YouTube channel. You can join for about the cost of a cup of coffee a month, you know, and then I do vlogs over there. I post content that never goes public, and I let you into my world. I let you into the COP audio world, and I let you see what our day-to-day life looks like. Love you guys. Thank you for the support. So let me start off this conversation by saying, in the world of where retailers want us to buy more and more equipment to do what it is that we do, I am here as your spokesperson to some unofficial degree or another, trying to bring forth a message of saving every dollar, pinching nickels and dimes into dollars, and not buying gear that we don't necessarily need to have in our systems. A system processor like a Drive Rack PA or something like that is not necessarily something that you have to have in a club rig, you know, or even a medium-sized sound system in today's market. The way I run my B, C, D rigs, they all kind of run the same way, whether they're active or they're passive, is I aux feed the subs through a DBX crossover. I cross over at 70 hertz. I know that's a controversy, and we've had that argument in the shorts for 2 weeks. Just bear with me. And then we run our tops in stereo, and we high pass filter the tops around 80 hertz, you know, 75, 80 hertz, understanding the slopes between those 2 points at your crossover point and what that means. We've had a lot of conversation about resonant frequency. We may talk about some of that again today. But yeah, that really works. I just had a conversation with a guy that was here at my shop an hour ago and bought some gear off of me about this very subject. And he's like, well, I like to have a processor because it makes my life easier. I said, but does it really? Because unless you're running multiple arrays around the room and you really need to time align that, like big time, you can still delay those things out of a matrix in your digital console. So what are you using? You have, you know, a house EQ that can do anything you need there, that can tweak and change a little bit from room to room, and it's a lot easier to do on my iPad and mixing station in my scene than it is to break the laptop out, plug it into the processor, and then, you know, make that front of house EQ change there. I have compression, I have, you know, all kinds of dynamic tools at my disposal, and I can do some time aligning stuff because you can delay the matrix outs and, you know, make those things kind of work. So what do I really need a processor for? It's something you got to ask yourself. You know, the way I dial in my tops, I specifically like to do this with bass guitar. Bass guitar and even keyboards are a great reference if you have a really clean bass sound. A bass player who actually understands what bass tone is. Let me preface it with that. Same thing with keys. If you have a keyboard player who actually knows how to put together intelligent keyboard sounds, I like to kind of use those instruments as my litmus test. You know, I'll pull the aux sub clean out of the system and I'm just listening to the tops, and I take that high pass filter and I kind of move it around to the sweet spot that my tops like and that my tops reproduce comfortably. That typically falls inside of that, you know, 75 to 80, 85, you know, range or whatever. And guys are like, well, what about the frequencies between 70 and 80? Well, you have to understand the slopes, man. You have to understand, you know, and I try to keep this stuff, I try to speak English and not just get on here and spec you to death and talk over your head and explain this in a manner that you know less after you've watched the video than what you did before you watched the video. So I try to keep this in very common language. These slopes, curves, there's different forms of those. Raleigh-Lentzwitz, Butterworth, there's all kinds of different slopes and curves, or Q, as some people can call them. Q is usually attached to an EQ. I know that, don't freak out. But these are different titles, different terms that we use to describe those slopes and how drastic they are, you know, and that sort of thing. But I kind of move that around, you know, to where I kind of can hear with my ears. I use these things on the side of my head, not what I see with my eyes, but what I hear with my ears. And I kind of let my ears tell me what the sweet spot is for my tops. Even if I end up at, say, like 90 hertz, I still don't go back to my aux sub crossover and change that, because there are resonant frequencies that take place in that part of the bandwidth or frequency spectrum that are present whether you're pushing them or not, and you typically don't need to push those frequencies because you'll get a lot, especially indoors, you get a lot of that from the room, the natural resonance of the room. If I can speak the English freaking language today. And you'll get it from stage volume, you know, so on and so forth. It's like bass guitar. I've seen a lot of guys in the comments section on my sub talk 2 weeks ago that, you know, they feel like they really need to push 40 and 50 hertz in the bass guitar. I never push 40 or 50 hertz in the bass guitar in my middle market B, C, and D rig sound systems. I don't really push it even in my A rig. The low end meat of the bass guitar is somewhere between 100 and 250, depending on the instrument, depending on the player, depending on how the player approaches the instrument and his playing style, whatever that may be. And then I let it resonate down into those lower frequencies. And guess what? Even though I'm not pushing those frequencies in the EQ, they're there. It's like elfin magic, you know? It's there. Or like Prego spaghetti sauce. It's in there. I even did a short last week called It's In There. There was like 2 Gen Xers that got that. It's okay. It's not that big of a deal. I digress. Nevertheless, it's there, dude. It's there. I open up that bass channel in the aux sub, give it room to breathe, and guess what it does? It breathes down into the low end. Now, if it's a bass guitar that's super boomy, you know, down on the bottom end, and it's robbing the bass of its definition, I will start to high pass that channel until it starts to clean up. And wherever that falls is where it's going to live for the night, you know, because I want to hear each individual note that the bass player is playing. That's very crucial to me. So that's kind of how I set, up most of my systems. Like even the JBL rig you see me fly with the stage, if you're someone who follows the CLP Audio and Staging Facebook page and Instagram page, there's all kinds of video and all that kind of, even the J.R. Everhart Facebook page, the Grumpy Sound Guy page, there's video on there of that rig. That rig is set up exactly like that. That is my B outdoor rig. It's not my A rig. And as you can hear in the videos, the proof is in the pudding. The bass guitar is nice and defined. There's no issues with the left hand of the keyboard. The kick, when you don't push that 40, 50 hertz with the bass guitar, it opens up that spectrum of low frequency for the kick to have room to do what it does. I usually push the punch of the kick between 50 and 60 hertz. It depends on the drum, depends on how it's tuned. My favorite bass drums have a natural 50 hertz bump, and that hits you in the chest nicely, fills out that low end spectrum really well. If I'm mixing on a Pro Touring rig that has a lot more low end spectrum reproduction, I may roll that down to 40, 45 hertz because I can. If you own a Ferrari and you drive 200 mile an hour and somebody asks you, why do you drive 200 mile an hour? Because I can. So if I'm on a rig that can reproduce that, then I don't have a problem being that guy. But I'm always mixing to the system. So now let's take me out of my own comfortable little box of my systems that are designed the way I want them to be designed and put me on someone else's system. I will use those same parameters, but the top high pass filter may move around depending on how efficient or inefficient their top speakers are. I still leave the sub alone. I still don't move that 70 hertz crossover point on the sub. If at all possible, if I'm stuck on an active rig and the lowest crossover point on the active box itself is like, say 80 hertz, I go as low as it'll let me go, 270 hertz. If it's 100 hertz, okay, we're gonna work with whatever you give us. We're not gonna start writing letters to the manufacturer. We're just going to work with what we have. But it's crucial that I listen to those tops by themselves and roll that high pass filter up and down between that 70 and 100 hertz or something like that, and see where the tops feel like they're most comfortable, they're most efficient. They don't feel like they're struggling to reproduce sub frequencies that maybe the speaker itself is not designed to be able to do. Those are things that you have to take into account as well. So I always try to mix to whatever the system can give me. If I'm on a small little cheap active rig that's plastic boxes, man, I just make the best of what it has, and I lower my expectations and don't try to mix the thing into the ground or mix it to the moon into being something that it's not. It's super crazy simple, If I'm on a big honking rig that has a lot of room to move around in the full spectrum 20 to 20, well then, I mix accordingly, the right mix technique for the right environment, for the right system, for the right band. I mix R&B guys differently than rock and roll guys, then differently than jazz guys, differently than bluegrass, differently than country. All that stuff. You know what I'm saying? I mix all that stuff differently. Now, JR, when do we use a processor? I suggest that you use a processor anytime you have like network install going on, where you're pushing audio in a bunch of weird different places. You need a lot of outputs, or you have a system that's more than just two-way. Mid, high, and sub, which is basically what I just described. If I'm on a system that's three-way, processor every time. My 850 rig is four-way. The tops are high, mid, low, and then aux sub, into the subs. So yes, we very much need processors for that. And when you get into some of those higher end rigs, now the processor is set up for those rigs. You find this in a lot of high-end, all the high-end line array stuff. Those processors are made to delay a line as to correct for the depth of the drivers and how they're mounted in the box. And that makes a difference. It really does. You can align your subs a little bit, maybe delay them 6 milliseconds because they're 6 feet forward from the tops, so everything's hitting you kind of at the same time and that sort of thing. I don't get into a bunch of that kind of stuff when I am doing club stuff or I'm doing street festivals or things like that. Just middle of the road, middle market kind of stuff at the city park, at the county fair on a Tuesday night for your local country band, all that kind of stuff. We just try to keep things simple. We don't try to overcomplicate things. I was just talking to a guy the other day who was asking me about some of the newer mixing consoles that are out, and we got to talking about some of the Pro Touring consoles, Digico and Avid and D-Live and just all the things, Midas, Heritage, all that stuff. And I said, the problem with those consoles becoming more and more affordable into the upper middle market is that you're given a lot of buzzers and whistles that you don't necessarily need. And it's the problem we had when we first moved analog guys to digital, especially novice guys who didn't understand the principles of less is more. I can remember when X32 really took off and everyone was buying X32s as fast as they could get their hands on them. Now you have, like in the analog world, you only had outboard gear, usually what you could afford or what you just absolutely had to have because you didn't want to carry more gear than when you had to. Now in the digital world, you got, full parametric EQs on every channel, compression, gates, 4 effects engines, like all this stuff is at your fingertips. And probably for like the first, 8 or 10 years that I've seen guys on digital consoles, they just were putting way too much icing on the cake to where we ended up with this much cake and this much icing, and it was cluttering up and just destroying mixes. It took a hot minute for a lot of these guys to realize less is more, and it's the same thing on the higher, more complicated, mixers. Now some of these middle market guys are trying to be cooler than the guy down the street and, spend 10 or 15 grand on a console to go do a $2,000 or $3,000 show, which makes no sense to me whatsoever. But nevertheless, I see it all the time. And then what you're doing is you're putting tools into the hands of someone who doesn't necessarily know how to apply those tools in an intelligent manner. And what they end up doing is they end up robbing their mix of fidelity, its organic nature. Dynamics disappear because things are overcompressed or they're overprocessed. I see a lot of redundant cancellation mixing, which is where you're adding it here and then taking it away here and then adding back over here. And it's like, how does that make any sense in your signal flow? It doesn't. And that's why your mix sounds like, Captain Starbuck in the 25th century or something or whatever, man. It's not working. It doesn't sound musical anymore. It sounds like something else. You can put whatever label you want to put on that, but it sounds like something else, So yeah, same thing with some of the higher end system processors. You get into some of the upper end of the drive rack. I would say will probably be the entry level up there. But then you get into like my system. I'm currently using a drive rack 260 on my 850 rig just to do the tops and then a crossover to do aux sub, a DBX external crossover, just like I do in my other systems. But we're going to put a UX8800 on that this year. And that's an EAW processor that's specifically made for that rig. It even has a genius feature where it just kind of goes in and does all, you punch in what cabinets you're using and it does all the work for you. And that's how it is with L Acoustics, D&B, VTX, JBL, Adamson, Meyer, all those big boys, Martin, they all have their own processors that, correct for environmental changes. You can input some of that stuff. That's why when you go to big Pro Touring concerts, you see laptops out everywhere. Everybody's looking at the rig. Everybody's looking at what's going on. Everybody's looking at Lake is another real popular one on Pro Touring, levels that just has enormous amounts of really, really cool stuff. And it does all the crazy science work for you and just makes your rig sing in a manner that it's supposed to be singing. So yeah, but 98.375% of middle market, weekend warrior sound engineers do not need any of that. Most y'all just be happy enough to plug everything up in stereo and it not catch on fire or feedback all night, because it's just kind of where your skill set is. I'm not talking down to you. I just see a lot of that, A lot of you guys could really benefit from going back a year on this channel and watching some of my art of mixing, videos and, stuff like that, because I just try to keep things simple. And a lot of guys, like I got a guy who came to work for me earlier this year who came from a pro touring company. And when he seen how I had my outdoor rig with the stage, that JBL rig set up, he was like, how does that even work, dude? Because he was used to being on big line array rigs with system processors and laptops everywhere, and everybody's got the tall calculator out, punching in trim heights and all the things that it takes to do that. And there's nothing wrong with all that. That's what it takes to do that on that level. But I don't think he had ever been on a system that was just simply correct. Let me say that again. My system is just simply, meaning it's not super complicated, correct. I am playing to the speaker's strengths. I'm not asking it to be anything else that it wasn't designed to be. I'm asking it to do exactly what it was designed to do. I'm giving it plenty of power to do that in a comfortable manner, to where I'm not redlining and clipping all the time. And it just produces nice, fat, warm mixes. It doesn't have to be complicated, Doing an aux sub setup, even on a smaller powered rig, will really clean up a lot of stuff right there, because then you're only putting things into the subs that need to be there: kick drum, floor tom, bass guitar, left hand of the keyboard, that sort of thing. You're not running vocals in your subs. You're not running guitar into your subs. You're not running the horn section into your subs. I mean, there's an intelligent way to place everything in its correct neighborhood in the spectrum of 20 to 20,000 hertz. I think I have a video from like 2 years ago, I think might have been, called Frequency Carving. We talk a lot about that in that video. We talk a lot about where everything should go. Go back and search for that video and check it out. Tons of really cool information there. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty much where we are this week, and what we're trying to bring home to you. I'm sure there'll be 20,000 people tell me that I'm wrong and you always need a system processor and blah, blah, blah. And, that's fine, dude. You do you, boo. If that's how you want to do it. I'm not here to tell you what you're doing is wrong. I'm here to tell you what the industry considers right, at least for the most part. There's some variances here and there. It's like the old saying: if you talk to 10 different sound guys about how to do X, Y, and Z, they'll give you 10 different answers. As long as we're all getting to the same result, I think we're mostly okay. But the things that I'm trying to tell you here on this channel and inside my content will get you there quicker, simpler, and more efficient. And that saves money. That drives your ROI right through the roof. So if you made it this far in the video, you should be a Grumpy Insider. Yes, we're like 20 couple minutes into the video and you're still hanging around. Hey, what's up, dude? How you doing? Thanks, welcome. I'm so glad that you came. Please consider becoming a Grumpy Insider and subscribe to this channel. It costs about the price of a cup of coffee each month, and you get member-only videos. We do one-on-one chats. Whenever you hit me up and you want to talk about something, you can make suggestions for videos. I'll do private videos just for members over there, that sort of thing. We do this both on Facebook and on YouTube, and it's pretty much the same content on either one, so it doesn't really matter where you sign up at. But yeah, become a Grumpy Insider, man, and get in the inside group and get on the cool bus, man. Sit at the cool table at the high school cafeteria with all the cool kids, man. Yeah, that's what the Grumpy Insiders are. And we have a lot of fun over there. We do weekly situations where it's like, hey, man, show me what your gig was this weekend, and stuff like that and everything. We talk a lot of shop, so yeah. Get over there and check that out. Love you guys. See you next week.